What happened when your husband tried to control you? I was reading an article about climate change at breakfast when my husband slammed his coffee cup down. Would you stop trying to be so woke already? He shouted while our 3 teenage sons burst out laughing. Nobody cares about your liberal bullcrap. Maybe focus on being a wife and mother instead of pretending you understand politics. My oldest son said through his laughter, "Yeah, Mom, you're embarrassing. Tyler's mom doesn't act like she knows everything." My middle son added, "Tyler's mom is normal. She doesn't lecture everyone about recycling and pronouns and whatever." I said quietly, "I'm just trying to stay informed." My husband snorted and said, "Informed? You're brainwashed by all that woke garbage. I liked you better when you didn't have opinions. Life was simpler when women knew their place and men could be men without apologizing for it." The boys high-fived him and said in unison, "Based, Dad." I set down my phone and said, "You're right. I'll stop being woke immediately." The next morning, I threw out my husband's medications. I announced, "Your blood pressure pills, your anxiety meds, your back pain medication, all gone. Modern medicine is just liberal propaganda. Traditional men tough it out." He protested, "Those are prescribed." I said, "By a female doctor. We can't trust that. I made you an appointment with the only male doctor I could find. He's 3 hours away and doesn't take our insurance, but at least he's traditional." I pulled the boys out of sex ed and any class with female teachers. I explained, "Can't have you being corrupted by progressive ideas. You'll take shop class and gym only. The rest is indoctrination." My oldest protested, "But I need chemistry to graduate." I said, "The chemistry teacher is a woman. That's unnatural. Women shouldn't be teaching men." I also called my husband's job and said, "My husband needs accommodations for his back pain? That's victim mentality. Real men work through pain. Please make sure you don't give him any special treatment." When his boss called about it, he yelled, "Are you insane?" I said, "Really? You want a participation trophy for doing your job?" When my middle son got injured at football practice, I made him wait. I said, "Traditional men walk it off first. We'll go to the doctor, but only the male one 3 hours away. We leave at 4 a.m. tomorrow." He begged, "Can't we just go to urgent care?" I said, "Run by a female nurse practitioner. That's progressive nonsense." My youngest complained about being hungry after I served them plain beans and bread for the 5th day straight. I explained, "Seasoning is multicultural influence. Traditional American food is bland and simple. We wouldn't want to taste anything ethnic. Also, I can't work anymore since women shouldn't have careers. So this is what our single income affords now." My oldest asked, confused, "Mom worked?" I said, "Of course not. I called my boss and quit. Traditional families have one provider. Your father's salary alone should be enough if he's a real man." My husband went pale and said, "We can't afford the mortgage on just my salary." I said, "Then you should work harder, unless you need a woman's help." When my oldest tried to text his girlfriend, I took his phone and said, "Traditional courtship means you visit her in person, with her father's permission, and I chaperone." He said, "That's insane." I said, "That's traditional. I already called her parents and explained. They think you're weird now and said you can't see her." His brothers laughed until I added, "Same rules for all of you." I stopped driving them anywhere and said, "Women driving is a modern invention. You'll have to walk or wait for your father." My middle son protested, "Soccer practice is 10 miles away." I said, "Better start walking. Or quit. Sports that include girls are too progressive anyway." When my husband got strep throat, I gave him honey and prayer and said, "Antibiotics are big pharma trying to control us. Traditional healing only." He tried to drive himself to urgent care, but I'd hidden the car keys and said, "That female doctor isn't appropriate. The male doctor can see you next Thursday." I'd also canceled our insurance and explained, "Insurance is socialist garbage. Traditional men pay cash." The school called about the boys' schedules. The bank called about missed mortgage payments. And my husband's boss called about his erratic behavior since going off his medications, while the boys had no social lives and ate beans every night. My husband finally begged with dark circles under his eyes, "Please, I was wrong. Be woke. Be anything. Just stop this." I asked innocently, "Stop what?" "I'm just being the traditional wife you wanted. Unless you're saying women should have equal say in decisions?" He said, "Yes. Equal. More than equal. Whatever you want." I smiled and pulled out my laptop and said, "Good. Then you'll support me running for school board to fight for comprehensive sex education?" They all nodded frantically. I asked, "And you'll volunteer for my campaign?" More desperate nodding. I said, "Perfect. Because I already filed the paperwork. My opponent is Tyler's mom, the normal one." I showed them her campaign website full of book-banning promises and anti-vaccine rhetoric and said, "She's leading in the polls." My husband's face went white while the boys looked horrified. I said calmly, "If she wins, her policies become mandatory for the whole district. Every student will live like you've been living." My oldest whispered, "We have to stop her." I handed them voter registration forms and looked my husband in the eye and said, "Better hope we win." She's also running on a platform of banning all modern medicine from the district, including your blood pressure medication. I hand each of them a voter registration form and watch my husband's fingers shake as he reaches for the pen. His skin still looks pale and drawn from days without his medications. The boys glance at each other with expressions that finally show they understand this isn't over just because they agreed to help. My middle son bites his lip while my youngest stares at the form like it might bite him. My oldest takes his pen and starts filling out the information with careful, deliberate movements. I collect the completed forms and tuck them into my laptop bag without saying anything else. The silence in the room feels heavy and uncomfortable. The next morning, I wake up early and start putting everything back to normal. I pull my husband's medications from where I'd hidden them in the garage and line them up on the bathroom counter. He walks in while I'm arranging the bottles and actually gasps before grabbing his blood pressure pill and swallowing it dry. I call the insurance company and reinstate our policy, then email the school to fix the boys' schedules back to their regular classes. When I start cooking breakfast, I pull out every spice in the cabinet and make bacon with actual seasoning, eggs with pepper, and toast with real butter. The boys stumble downstairs and freeze when they smell the food. My middle son practically lunges at the bacon and stuffs 3 pieces in his mouth at once. My youngest loads his plate with eggs and eats so fast I worry he'll choke. They're all quieter than usual, though. My oldest keeps glancing at me like he's waiting for me to take it all away again. My husband sits at the table with his coffee and watches me move around the kitchen, and I notice he doesn't make any jokes or comments. Nobody mentions the past few weeks directly. That afternoon, while the boys are at the school, I open my laptop and start researching Suzanne Watkins's campaign platform in detail. Her website loads with a banner photo of her family standing in front of a church. I click through her policy positions and feel my stomach drop with each new page. She wants to remove every book from the school libraries that features LGBTQ characters or themes. Her sex education policy calls for complete elimination of the curriculum and replacement with abstinence-only messaging. The science section proposes removing the entire climate change unit from environmental science classes because she calls it political propaganda. Her health services policy would require parental permission for school nurses to provide any care whatsoever, including Band-Aids for scraped knees. I keep scrolling and finding worse things. She wants to eliminate the school's anti-bullying program because she claims it promotes special treatment. She opposes accommodations for students with disabilities beyond what's legally required. She wants to ban any books that discuss racism in American history beyond what she calls basic facts. I screenshot several pages and save them to a folder. This woman wants to turn our school district into something unrecognizable. My oldest son finds me in the kitchen that evening while I'm preparing dinner. He hovers near the doorway for a minute before asking if his girlfriend can come over. I tell him yes without making him explain or justify it. He shifts his weight from foot to foot and then says quietly that he's sorry he said I was embarrassing. He adds that Tyler's mom is actually kind of scary when you really look at what she believes. I thank him for the apology and tell him it's a start. He nods and turns to leave, then stops and mentions that his girlfriend has been helping him understand some things about how he used to talk to people. I ask him to set an extra place for dinner and watch him walk away looking thoughtful instead of defensive. 2 days later, I attend my first campaign organizing meeting at a community center across town. I walk into a room packed with at least 30 other parents, all sitting in folding chairs arranged in rough rows. Nicole Houston stands at the front with a clipboard and a laptop connected to a projector. She's younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back and an intensity that makes everyone pay attention. She starts the meeting by outlining exactly what we're up against. Suzanne has name recognition from years of PTA involvement and church leadership. She has funding from several conservative organizations outside our district. She has a polished social media presence and professional campaign materials. Nicole clicks to the next slide and says we have something more important though. We have grassroots energy and the truth on our side. She explains that parents are terrified of Suzanne's platform once they actually read it instead of just hearing the pleasant-sounding talking points. Our job is to make sure every parent in the district knows exactly what Suzanne wants to do. Nicole assigns roles and tasks with impressive efficiency. Some people will focus on door-to-door canvassing, others on phone banking, others on social media outreach. She asks me to speak at community events because my story as a mother and candidate resonates with other parents. The next afternoon, I take my middle son to see the male doctor 3 hours away for a follow-up on his football injury. The doctor examines his ankle and shows us the x-rays on a light board. He explains that the badly sprained ankle has healed wrong because we waited too long for proper treatment. My son will need months of physical therapy to regain full mobility and strength. There might be permanent weakness that affects his athletic performance. The doctor writes a referral for a physical therapist and hands it to me without comment. On the drive home, my son stares out the window and doesn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he asks why we really waited so long to get him help. I tell him honestly that it's what happens when ideology becomes more important than common sense. When people care more about being right than about taking care of each other. He nods slowly and says he thinks he gets it now. The following week, the school counselor calls and asks me to come in for a meeting about my boys' schedule changes and subsequent reversal. I sit in her small office surrounded by inspirational posters and college brochures while she pulls up their records on her computer. She asks what happened, and I end up telling her the whole story from beginning to end. About my husband's demand that I stop being woke. About my malicious compliance experiment. About the campaign and Suzanne's platform. The counselor starts laughing halfway through and can't stop. She actually wipes tears from her eyes and has to catch her breath. When she finally composes herself, she tells me she's definitely voting for me. She says the school board needs someone who actually gets it, who understands that education is about preparing kids for real life, not protecting them from reality. She mentions that several teachers have privately expressed concern about what would happen if Suzanne wins. They're worried about curriculum restrictions and the chilling effect on classroom discussions. That same week, Nicole connects me with her husband, Christopher Houston, who runs a network of progressive activists in our area. We meet at a coffee shop downtown, and Christopher brings 3 other organizers with him. They've been fighting Suzanne's faction for years through various local campaigns and issues. Christopher explains that they're energized by having a candidate who can speak authentically about family values from a progressive perspective. Most of their previous candidates were either single without kids or didn't center their family experience in their messaging. Suzanne has dominated the family values narrative by default. I represent something they haven't had before: a mother who can talk about protecting all children, including her own, through comprehensive education and inclusive policies. The organizers offer resources including volunteer databases, phone banking tools, and connections to friendly media outlets. One woman mentions that her organization can help with childcare for volunteers who need it. A man offers to connect me with donors who've supported similar candidates in other districts. My husband sits down with me one night after the boys go to bed and admits something I wasn't expecting. He says he never actually believed most of what he was saying that morning at breakfast. He just liked the feeling of being in charge and having the boys look up to him. He liked the camaraderie of the three of them laughing together at my expense. The past few weeks were the most scared he's been since our youngest was born premature and spent time in the NICU. Going without his medications made him realize how much he depends on modern medicine, and how stupid his casual comments about traditional values really were. He's starting to understand why I care about these issues, why I read those articles, why I want to be involved in protecting comprehensive education. He says he's sorry for dismissing me and for teaching the boys to do the same. I tell him I appreciate the apology, and that I need him to keep showing up and doing the work, not just saying he understands. He agrees, and mentions that several guys at work have been asking him about the campaign after seeing my signs around town. A few days later, Nicole sets up a meeting between me and Ashton McGee, another mother running a grassroots campaign against Suzanne from a different angle. We meet at a local park while our kids play on the playground equipment. Ashton has been focused specifically on protecting school library funding after Suzanne's faction tried to cut the budget last year. She's built a coalition of librarians, teachers, and parents who value access to diverse books. As we talk, we realize our campaigns are stronger together than separate. Her library funding message resonates with people who care about resources and educational quality. My comprehensive education message resonates with people who care about preparing kids for real life. We decide to coordinate our messaging and events, appearing together at forums and cross-promoting each other's campaigns on social media. Ashton mentions that the local teachers union is planning to endorse candidates soon and suggests we meet with their leadership together. We exchange phone numbers and schedule a joint campaign event for the following month. Her kids run over asking for snacks, and I notice how naturally she talks to them about why she's running, explaining in age-appropriate terms that some people want to take books away from schools, and we think that's wrong. That evening, my youngest son knocks on my bedroom door holding his laptop and a stack of printouts about rising sea temperatures. He shifts his weight from foot to foot and asks if I can help him with his science project on climate change. I follow him to the kitchen table where he spreads out his research, and as we work through the data together, he mentions that Tyler said some really nasty things about their female English teacher at lunch today. He tells me it made him feel weird in a way it wouldn't have a month ago, like he suddenly noticed how mean it sounded instead of just laughing along. I ask what Tyler said, and my son explains it was crude comments about her body and jokes about women being too emotional to teach properly. He says he didn't laugh this time, and Tyler called him whipped. The next morning, the local newspaper arrives with profiles of all the school board candidates spread across 2 full pages. Suzanne's photo shows her standing in front of a large church with her husband and son, all 3 wearing matching polo shirts, and the caption reads something about returning to traditional values and protecting children from dangerous ideologies. My photo shows me at a PTA meeting from last year, leaning over a table covered in papers, and my quote talks about protecting every student's right to comprehensive education, regardless of their background or beliefs. I stare at the contrast between the 2 images and realize how perfectly they capture what this election is really about. My husband gets called into his boss's office that afternoon and has to explain the whole accommodation request situation. He comes home looking embarrassed but also kind of amused and tells me his boss laughed so hard she had tears running down her face. She apparently told him he's lucky to have a wife who fights that hard to make a point, and said she's voting for me because anyone who can teach their family a lesson like that deserves a spot on the school board. My husband admits it was mortifying to explain, but also that his boss's reaction made him see the whole thing differently. Like maybe my methods were extreme, but the lesson was necessary. That weekend, I start canvassing door to door with campaign flyers and voter information, and all 3 boys come with me even though they complain about walking in the heat. My oldest is awkward and stumbles over his talking points. My youngest mostly just hands out flyers without saying much, but my middle son surprises me by being genuinely good at this. He talks to other teenagers about why comprehensive sex education matters, and uses his own football injury as an example of why access to good healthcare shouldn't depend on ideology. I watch him explain to a girl around his age how scary it was to be hurt, and not able to see a doctor right away, and she nods along and says her mom has been on the fence about voting, but this conversation might change her mind. We cover 12 blocks that day, and my feet ache, but I feel like we actually reached people instead of just dropping flyers and running. The following Tuesday, there's a community event at the public library for local voter registration, and both Suzanne and I show up to work the crowd. I watch her from across the room and she's incredibly polished and confident, moving from group to group with perfect timing and always saying exactly the right thing to make people nod and smile. She talks about parental rights and protecting innocence and keeping schools focused on basics instead of social agendas, and it all sounds so reasonable until you actually think about what she means by those phrases. I see parents gravitating toward her because she looks and sounds like someone who has it all together, someone who represents stability and traditional family values. A local parents group invites both of us to speak at their monthly meeting the next week, and Suzanne goes first with a slick presentation on her laptop. She shows out of context quotes from books in the school library that sound shocking. When you don't know the full story, talks about moral decline and dangerous ideologies corrupting children, and uses statistics about test scores that seem to support her argument until you dig into the actual data. Parents in the audience look genuinely concerned by the time she finishes, and several people applaud loudly. When it's my turn, I don't have a fancy presentation, just my own story. I tell them about that breakfast when my family demanded I stop being woke, and what happened when I gave them exactly what they asked for. I explain how my husband suffered without his medications, how my middle son's injury got worse because we couldn't access proper care, how my boys lost educational opportunities and social connections. I watch parents in the audience start nodding, and some actually laugh in recognition like they've seen similar dynamics in their own homes. I tell them Suzanne's policies would make those restrictions mandatory for every family in the district, whether they want them or not. After the meeting, 3 mothers approach me privately while I'm packing up my materials. The first one tells me about her daughter being told she's too emotional for advanced math by a male teacher who thinks girls can't handle STEM subjects. The second shares how her son got punished for crying after he fell on the playground, because the principal said boys need to toughen up. The third explains that her teenager asked basic questions about puberty and relationships, and she realized she had no idea how to answer, because her own parents never taught her anything. All 3 of them pull out their phones right there and register to vote specifically to oppose Suzanne. My oldest son's girlfriend comes over for dinner a few days later, and I notice how different he acts now compared to a month ago. He listens when she talks about her college plans without interrupting or trying to redirect the conversation to himself. He asks follow-up questions about her interests instead of dismissing them as boring. After she leaves, he sits with me in the kitchen while I clean up and tells me she's been helping him understand why the things he used to say were hurtful. He mentions specific comments he made before about women being too sensitive or feminism going too far, and he says she explained patiently why those ideas hurt real people, including her. He admits he's actually listening now instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. The campaign work piles on top of everything else I do, and some nights I fall into bed at 11 wondering if I'm completely crazy to think I can win this race against someone with more money and better name recognition. But then the next morning, my youngest brings me coffee without being asked and sets it on my nightstand. He tells me I've got this and that. Everyone at the school is talking about how cool it is that someone's mom is actually running for something instead of just complaining. He says even kids whose parents support Suzanne think it's impressive that I'm trying. Elliot Singh shows up at my door 3 days later with a recorder and a notebook. We sit at the kitchen table where this whole thing started, and he jumps right into questions about my platform and qualifications. He asks what makes me think I can handle school board politics when I've never held office before. I start explaining my research into curriculum standards, and he interrupts to ask specific policy questions about Title IX compliance and state education codes. I answer without hesitating, citing the articles I've been reading for months, and halfway through explaining the difference between comprehensive sex education and abstinence-only programs, I realize I actually know this stuff cold. All those mornings my husband mocked me for reading about climate change and social issues gave me a real education in how policy and governance actually work. Elliot scribbles notes and asks about my opponent's book banning list. I name 6 titles Suzanne wants removed and explain what each book actually teaches kids about identity, resilience, and finding themselves. He raises his eyebrows and says most candidates can't name 3 books on any list. The interview runs 90 minutes, and when he leaves, he mentions the feature will run in Sunday's paper. Victoria Ramey calls me that afternoon and asks if I want to meet for coffee. We sit in a corner booth at the diner on Main Street, and she tells me she's been fighting Suzanne's faction alone on the board for 2 years. She looks tired but excited to potentially have an ally. She explains how the board actually works, which members vote together, where the real power struggles happen behind the scenes. She says Suzanne's 2 allies always vote as a bloc, and they've killed every progressive initiative she's tried to pass. Victoria pulls out a folder with voting records and budget documents, showing me exactly where the fights will be hardest. She warns me that even if I win, the work is just beginning because Suzanne's supporters will fight every single policy change. She also mentions that 3 board seats are up for election in 2 years, and we need to start planning now for who might run. I take notes on everything and realize this is way more complicated than I expected, but Victoria seems genuinely hopeful that together we can actually shift things. My husband starts coming to campaign events with me on weekends. I can tell it's uncomfortable for him when his coworkers drive past and see him holding signs about comprehensive sex education and LGBTQ inclusive curricula. His face goes red and he shifts the sign to try hiding his face, but he doesn't leave. One of his buddies from work pulls over and yells something about him being whipped, and my husband just waves and keeps holding the sign. Later, he admits it's hard because the guys at work have been giving him grief about me running, making jokes about who wears the pants in our family. But he shows up anyway at the next event, and the one after that. It matters more than I expected that he's willing to be uncomfortable in public to support something he used to mock me for caring about. He's not perfect, and sometimes I catch him looking embarrassed, but he stays put, and that's what counts. Nicole calls me in a panic because Suzanne's campaign just released an attack ad. I watch it on my phone and my stomach drops. The ad shows scary music and dark images while a voice calls me a radical progressive who wants to sexualize children and push woke ideology on innocent students. It uses quotes from my campaign materials completely out of context to make it sound like I want to teach kindergartners about sex. My first instinct is to panic and call Nicole back asking what we do now. She talks me down and explains this actually means they're worried. She says you don't attack candidates you think you can ignore, and the fact that they're spending money on attack ads means their internal polls must show the race tightening. She reminds me that attack ads often backfire because they make the attacker look desperate and mean. We schedule an emergency meeting with the campaign team to plan our response. We decide to release our own ad featuring local parents talking about why they support comprehensive education. We film it in people's living rooms and backyards, keeping it simple and authentic. Parents explain wanting their kids to have accurate health information and access to diverse books that reflect different experiences. My middle son insists on appearing in the ad even though I'm scared about putting him in the public eye. He talks directly to the camera about his football injury and how important it is to have access to good health care and accurate information when you need it. He mentions that kids deserve to know the truth about their bodies and their options. I'm watching through the camera screen while he films, and I'm both proud and worried about what this might mean for him at the school. But he's calm and clear, and when we finish filming, he says he wanted to help because this matters. The ad goes live 2 days later and starts getting shared all over social media. The mortgage company calls again, but this time it's different. The officer on the phone confirms we're back on track with payments now that I'm working again. She mentions she's seen my campaign signs around town and plans to vote for me. She explains quietly that her daughter is gay, and she's scared about what Suzanne would do to the school environment if she wins. She says her daughter already faces enough challenges without the school board making it worse. She thanks me for running and wishes me luck before hanging up. I sit there holding the phone for a minute after the call ends, thinking about how many families are dealing with similar fears about what happens if Suzanne's policies become reality. 3 weeks before the election, we have our first debate at the community center. Suzanne shows up in a navy suit looking polished and prepared. She hits all her talking points about parental rights and traditional values, speaking smoothly about protecting children from inappropriate content and letting parents decide what's best for their families. When it's my turn, I counter with specifics about what students actually need. I talk about comprehensive health education that teaches kids about consent and healthy relationships. I mention diverse literature that helps all students see themselves reflected in what they read. I explain science curriculum that prepares kids for the reality of climate change and environmental challenges. Suzanne keeps her answers vague and emotional, while I give concrete examples and policy details. I can see some people in the audience nodding when I speak, but others look skeptical or angry. Someone from the audience asks about book banning during the question period. Suzanne gives a rehearsed answer about age-appropriate content and protecting innocence, saying parents have a right to shield their children from mature themes. I wait for her to finish and then ask if she's actually read the books she wants to ban. She hesitates and says she's reviewed summaries and concerning passages. I list 3 books from her target list and explain what they're really about. One is about a kid surviving their parents' divorce, another is about a teenager figuring out their identity, and the third is about friends supporting each other through hard times. I explain these aren't the scary quotes taken out of context that her campaign shares, but actual stories of kids finding themselves and surviving difficult situations. I mention that banning books doesn't protect children. It just keeps them from finding stories that might help them feel less alone. Several parents in the audience start clapping before the moderator reminds everyone to hold applause until the end. My youngest son comes home from the school the next week with a story about Tyler. He says Tyler got in trouble for saying something racist in class, and when the teacher addressed it, Tyler said his mom told him it was just being honest, and people are too sensitive now. My son explains that he stood up and disagreed with Tyler right there in class. He told Tyler that saying hurtful things isn't the same as being honest, and that understanding how words affect people isn't being too sensitive. He admits Tyler's his friend, and it was hard to call him out, but he's starting to see how Tyler's mom's ideas actually hurt real people. He mentions other kids in class backed him up and the teacher thanked him for speaking up. I ask if things are weird with Tyler now and he shrugs and says maybe, but some things are more important than keeping a friend comfortable. We hold a rally 2 weeks before the election at the park downtown. I'm expecting maybe 20 people based on our previous events, but over 100 show up. Parents bring their kids, teachers come during their off hours, and even some students who can't vote yet hold signs supporting comprehensive education. Nicole organized everything perfectly with a small stage and a sound system. Local parents speak about why they're supporting my campaign, sharing personal stories about their kids and their fears about Suzanne's policies. When it's my turn to speak, my husband stands next to me on the makeshift stage holding my hand. I look out at all these people who showed up on a Saturday morning to support something they believe in, and I have to pause for a second before starting. My husband squeezes my hand, and I can see he's genuinely proud, not embarrassed or uncomfortable like he used to be. I talk about fighting for every student's right to comprehensive education and protecting access to diverse books and accurate information. The crowd cheers and holds up their signs, and for the first time, I think we might actually have a chance at winning this thing. 2 days later, my phone starts blowing up with messages about a new attack ad from Suzanne's campaign. I pull it up online and watch this slickly produced video that shows photos of our house and my husband's workplace, while a serious voice talks about unstable families and questionable judgment. The ad claims my husband had a mental breakdown at work and implies I'm too busy with radical politics to take care of my family properly. It's a complete distortion of what actually happened, taking the weirdness from my malicious compliance experiment and spinning it like we're genuinely dysfunctional. I feel sick watching it, worried about how this will affect my husband's job and what people will think. But then the comments start rolling in on the campaign's social media. Parent after parent who knows us personally calls the ad disgusting and desperate. Someone posts a photo from the rally showing our whole family together looking happy and supportive. My husband's coworkers start defending him online, explaining he's a respected employee, and the ad is full of lies. By the end of the day, even people who weren't supporting me before are saying the attack crossed a line. Nicole calls that evening and says the ad actually helped us because it made Suzanne look mean and dishonest. She thinks we might have picked up swing voters who were turned off by the nastiness. My oldest son comes home from the school the next afternoon looking upset in a way I haven't seen in months. I ask what happened, and he sits down heavily at the kitchen table. He explains that Tyler said something really crude about Mrs. Stevenson, their English teacher, during class discussion. Something about how she probably only got her job because of diversity hiring and she's too emotional to teach properly. My son says he felt his face get hot, and before he could stop himself, he stood up and told Tyler that was completely inappropriate and disrespectful. He said Mrs. Stevenson is one of the best teachers in the school, and Tyler was being a jerk just like his mom taught him to be. The whole class went silent and Tyler's face turned red. The teacher thanked my son for speaking up, but he could tell Tyler was furious. After class, Tyler cornered him and said they were done being friends if he was going to side with feminists over his boys. My son told Tyler that was fine because he didn't want to be friends with someone who treated women like that anyway. He admits to me now that it hurts losing a friend he's had since elementary school, but he couldn't just sit there and let Tyler talk about a teacher like she was worthless. He says some friendships aren't worth keeping if they mean becoming a worse person yourself. I hug him and tell him I'm proud of him, even though I know it cost him something real. The following Monday, Nicole calls an emergency meeting because new polling data just came in. We all crowd into her living room and she pulls up the numbers on her laptop. With 1 week left until the election, Suzanne is ahead by 3 points. It's closer than anyone expected, but she still has the edge. Nicole explains that 3 points is within the margin where strong turnout could flip everything. If we can get every single supporter to the polls and maybe convince some undecided voters in the final days, we have a real shot. She's already organized a massive effort for the last week, assigning different neighborhoods to different volunteers. My whole family commits to spending every evening after school and work going door to door. My husband takes time off work for the final 3 days to canvass full time. Nicole hands out scripts and walking lists and reminds everyone this is when campaigns are won or lost, in the final push when people are actually paying attention. The energy in the room is intense, everyone suddenly understanding that we might actually pull this off if we work hard enough. I run into Rodney Watkins at the grocery store on Wednesday evening. We both freeze when we see each other in the cereal aisle, and for a second I think about just walking away. But he clears his throat and says he respects that I'm running even though obviously he's supporting his wife. He looks uncomfortable, shifting his weight and not quite meeting my eyes. Then he leans in slightly and says quietly that he's not sure he agrees with all of Suzanne's positions anymore. He says some of the things she's been saying on the campaign trail have made him uncomfortable, especially about medical care and what books kids should be allowed to read. But he can't say any of that publicly because she's his wife and he has to support her. He asks if I understand and I nod, because I do. I almost feel sorry for him, trapped between loyalty to his wife and growing doubts about what she actually believes. We stand there awkwardly for another moment before he says good luck and pushes his cart away. I watch him go and wonder how many other people in Suzanne's life are quietly questioning her ideas, but feel like they can't speak up. My middle son has physical therapy on Thursday afternoon, and I drive him to the appointment. His ankle is healing well and he's been working hard at the exercises. The therapist, a woman in her 40s named Maria, puts him through his movements and seems pleased with his progress. As we're finishing up, she mentions casually that she's voting for me. She says she's tired of seeing kids come in with injuries that got way worse because their parents delayed treatment for ideological reasons. She explains it happens more than people think. Parents who don't trust female medical providers or who think tough kids should just push through pain. She's seen sprained ankles become permanent damage and infections that could have been simple become serious because families waited too long to get proper care. My son looks at his own ankle and I can see him making the connection to what almost happened to him. Maria says she's glad to see a candidate who understands that kids need actual health care, not ideology. As we leave, my son is quiet, but I notice him walking more carefully, like he's newly aware of how lucky he is that his injury is healing right. 3 days before the election, there's a community forum where all the school board candidates make final statements. The high school auditorium is packed with parents and teachers and even some students. Suzanne speaks first and she's clearly prepared for this moment. She gives this emotional speech about protecting children from dangerous ideas and preserving innocence. She talks about parental rights and traditional values and keeping schools focused on basics instead of social agendas. Her voice catches at certain points like she might cry, and I can see people in the audience nodding along. When it's my turn, I walk up to the microphone and take a breath. I talk about trusting kids with truth because that's how we prepare them for the real world. I explain that comprehensive education means giving students the tools they need to think critically and make informed decisions. I say that banning books and limiting information doesn't protect kids, it just leaves them unprepared for life. I talk about believing in their ability to handle complex ideas and difficult topics because they're smarter and more capable than we sometimes give them credit for. The applause when I finish is strong, But I can tell the room is divided. Some faces supportive and others clearly opposed. After the forum ends, people mill around talking and I'm shaking hands and answering quick questions. A man approaches me with his teenage daughter, maybe 15 or 16 years old. He introduces himself and says his daughter came out to him last year. His voice is shaky when he explains that he's scared of what will happen to her at the school if Suzanne wins. He says she's already a target for some kids and he's worried that Suzanne's policies would make it officially acceptable to treat her badly. His daughter adds that she's heard kids say cruel things because they know Suzanne's campaign has made that kind of talk more acceptable. She says some teachers have tried to shut it down, but other teachers seem fine with it now. They both thank me for running and say they're counting on me to protect kids like her. I promise I'll fight for every student's right to feel safe at the school. But after they walk away, I feel the weight of how much is riding on this election. It's not just about policy anymore. It's about real kids who are watching to see if adults will protect them or abandon them. Election day arrives and I'm too nervous to eat breakfast. My stomach feels tight and my hands shake slightly when I try to pour coffee. My oldest son is 18 now and this is his first time voting, which feels huge. My younger two boys are coming to watch and volunteer as poll observers with me even though they can't vote yet. We all pile into the car and my husband squeezes my hand before starting the engine. He says that regardless of what happens today, he's grateful I made him wake up. He says the past few months have been hard, but they taught him things he needed to learn about himself and about respecting other people's knowledge and experience. My oldest son reaches forward from the back seat and squeezes my shoulder. We drive to the polling place in silence, everyone lost in their own thoughts about what this day might bring. The hours at the polling place crawl by in this strange mix of boring and stressful. I see neighbors and parents from the school coming in to vote. Some smile and give me thumbs up. Others look away or hurry past without acknowledgement. Mrs. Gomez from the PTA stops to hug me and whisper good luck. Mr. Rodriguez, who spoke at our rally, brings his whole family to vote and makes sure I see them. But I also see plenty of people who I know support Suzanne, and the looks they give me range from cold to hostile. I try to stay positive and thank everyone for voting regardless of who they're supporting, but it's exhausting. My boys take shifts as poll observers, watching the process and making sure everything runs smoothly. Around 3 in the afternoon, my middle son mentions that Suzanne is at a different polling location across town, probably having the same weird experience of watching democracy happen while your fate hangs in the balance. I imagine her standing there greeting voters, both of us waiting for the same results that will mean totally opposite things to our families. That evening, we gather at Nicole's house with the campaign team to watch results come in. Her living room is packed with volunteers and supporters. Everyone crowded around laptops and phones showing live updates. The first precinct results post around 7:30, and my stomach drops when I see Suzanne ahead by almost 200 votes. Nicole immediately reminds everyone that we knew early returns would favor Suzanne because her strongest areas report first. She pulls up a spreadsheet showing which precincts are still out, and explains that our best neighborhoods report later in the evening. She says this is exactly what we expected and we just have to wait. But waiting is torture. Watching the numbers update every few minutes and doing math in my head about what we need from remaining areas. My youngest son sits next to me refreshing the results page constantly. My husband brings me water I don't drink, and my oldest son paces between the living room and kitchen like he can't sit still. My boys crowd around the laptop on Nicole's coffee table, faces lit by the screen glow as they refresh the results page over and over. My youngest has a notebook out doing math in the margins, calculating percentages we need from each remaining precinct, and muttering numbers under his breath. My middle son opens a pizza box someone brought and eats slice after slice without seeming to taste it, just chewing mechanically while his eyes stay locked on the screen. My oldest paces between the couch and the window until his girlfriend grabs his arm and pulls him down next to her, but his leg bounces so hard it shakes the whole couch. Around 9, the numbers shift again, and I watch the gap narrow from 300 votes to 200, with 3 precincts still out. The room goes completely quiet except for someone's nervous humming. I think it's one of the volunteers and the steady thump of my husband's knee hitting the table leg as he bounces it up and down. Nicole pulls up her spreadsheet again and points to the remaining precincts, explaining which ones should favor us. But her voice sounds tight and I can tell she's nervous too, despite trying to project confidence. My youngest announces we need 62% of the remaining vote to win, and everyone stares at the screen like we can make the numbers change faster by looking harder. The next precinct finally reports and the room explodes as we jump into the lead by 50 votes. People are screaming and hugging, but Nicole shushes everyone frantically, saying there are still 2 precincts out and anything can happen. Literally anything. My husband pulls me close and I can feel his heart beating so fast against my back, matching the rhythm of my own pulse hammering in my ears. The celebration dies down into tense waiting again as we stare at the screen showing our tiny 50-vote lead. Results keep trickling in from the remaining precincts, but they're split somehow, different parts reporting at different times, and we watch the lead swing back and forth like a pendulum. Ahead by 30 votes, then behind by 20, then ahead by 70. My oldest son has gone pale and keeps swallowing hard like he might throw up, and honestly I feel exactly the same way, my stomach churning with every number change. Someone's phone dings and everyone jumps, but it's just a text message, not a results update. At 10:30, the final precinct posts its numbers and we surge ahead to 112 votes. The room holds its breath as we wait for the official certification, nobody moving or speaking, but Nicole is already crying and throwing her arms around Christopher, And then other people start celebrating around us, cautious at first and then louder. My phone rings and I nearly drop it answering. The election office worker on the other end confirms the results officially, explaining that I won by 112 votes out of nearly 8,000 cast. She mentions that it's close enough Suzanne could request a recount, but it would cost money, and probably wouldn't change anything. The words feel unreal even as I hear them. I'm going to be on the school board. My boys tackle me in a group hug that actually knocks me backward into the couch, all three of them talking at once and squeezing so hard I can barely breathe. My husband is crying, actual tears running down his face, and he keeps saying he's sorry, that he's so sorry it took almost losing everything for him to understand why this mattered so much. I'm crying too, overwhelmed by the exhaustion of months of campaigning, and the relief of winning, and the weight of what comes next, what I actually have to do now. The celebration continues around us, but I feel frozen in this moment with my family, all of us holding each other and crying. Around 11, my phone rings again, and the screen shows Suzanne's number. The room goes quiet as I answer, and she's gracious on the phone, congratulating me and saying she hopes I'll represent all families in the district, not just the ones who voted for me. I thank her and mean it, even though I know she'll be organizing opposition to everything I try to do from day one. Democracy is messy like that, full of people who disagree but have to find ways to work together anyway. The local news runs the story that night with footage from both our watch parties, and Elliot's article goes up online immediately after the official call. The headline reads, "Mother's malicious compliance leads to the school board victory," and the story tells everything. The whole tale from that breakfast argument about me being too woke, through my response showing them what traditional really meant, all the way to this campaign and tonight's results. I read it on my phone while people celebrate around me, and it feels surreal seeing my life turned into a news story that other people will read and share. The next morning, I wake up to my phone buzzing constantly with messages that haven't stopped since the results came in. Parents are thanking me for running, teachers expressing relief that someone will fight for comprehensive education, students saying they feel safer now knowing the board won't ban books or eliminate sex ed. But mixed in with the supportive messages are angry ones from Suzanne's supporters calling me names I won't repeat, and threatening to make my time on the board absolutely miserable, promising to show up at every meeting to oppose me, vowing to make sure I regret winning. Victoria calls around noon the next day to officially welcome me to the board, but her tone is serious rather than celebratory. She explains that Suzanne's faction still controls 2 seats on the 7-person board, which means every single vote will be a battle that requires careful coalition building and strategic timing. I take notes while she talks, writing down the names of the other board members and where they stand on various issues. She warns me that some members vote based on politics, others based on personal relationships, and a few actually vote based on what's best for students, so I'll need to figure out who's who fast. We schedule a meeting for later that week so she can walk me through the policy documents I'll need to understand before my first official meeting in 2 weeks. After we hang up, I stare at my notebook full of names and notes and realize I have no idea what I'm actually doing, but I guess that's never stopped me before. The next 2 weeks become a crash course in the school board operations as I spend every spare moment reading policy manuals, budget documents, and meeting minutes from the past year. Victoria meets with me 3 times during this period, helping me understand which battles are worth fighting immediately and which need more groundwork first. She explains that some issues have enough support to pass right away, while others will require months of community organizing and coalition building before we can even bring them to a vote. I learn about Robert's Rules of Order, budget line items, state education codes, and the complicated politics of 7 people trying to govern schools while dealing with their own egos and agendas. My oldest son's girlfriend comes over one afternoon during this preparation period, and while the boys are upstairs gaming, she sits with me in the kitchen and drops a bomb. Her parents are getting divorced, and her mom specifically mentioned my campaign as inspiration to stop accepting her dad's dismissive treatment of her opinions and career. I don't know what to say at first because being someone's inspiration for divorce feels weird and heavy, but then she adds that her mom seems genuinely happier now, lighter somehow, like she's been carrying a weight for years and finally put it down. The girl thanks me for running and says watching the campaign taught her that women don't have to accept being treated as less than, and she's grateful her mom is learning that too, even if it means her family is changing. The school counselor who supported me during the campaign reaches out about forming a student advisory committee that would give kids actual input on policies affecting them. She's excited because it's exactly the kind of thing Suzanne would have opposed as giving children too much power, but now we can actually implement better ideas that include student voices. We schedule a planning meeting to figure out how to structure the committee, how students would be were selected, and what kind of authority they'd have in the process. My middle son's ankle finishes healing around this same time, and his coach pulls me aside at pickup to mention something interesting. My son has been standing up to teammates who make sexist jokes about the girls on the team, and while it's made him less popular with some of the guys, the girls really respect him for it, and the team dynamic is actually improving. The coach says he's noticed a shift in my son's attitude this season, more mature somehow, more aware of how his words affect others. I don't tell the coach about the beans and the 3-hour doctor visits, but I think about how sometimes the hardest lessons stick the deepest. My first official board meeting arrives 2 weeks after the election, and I'm so nervous I barely sleep the night before. The meeting room is smaller than I expected, with 7 chairs around a table and rows of seats for community members who want to observe. I propose updating the sex education curriculum to include information about consent, healthy relationships, and LGBTQ topics, using the research and talking points Victoria helped me prepare. Suzanne's two faction members oppose it predictably, using the same tired arguments about parental rights and age-appropriate content that she used during the campaign. But I have the votes with Victoria and two other members who believe in comprehensive education, and the measure passes 4-3. The vote makes local news that evening, and my phone explodes again with messages ranging from enthusiastic support to furious outrage. Someone leaves a nasty note on my car windshield calling me a groomer and threatening to recall me from the board. But 3 neighbors bring over flowers and thank you cards saying they're proud of me. My husband deals with some comments at work from people who disagree with the vote, but he handles them better than I expected, firmly shutting down anyone who tries to criticize me and explaining that he supports comprehensive education for all students. 2 months into my term, we pass a policy protecting students' right to use names and pronouns that match their identity. It's a small thing in some ways, just words on paper about how teachers should address kids, but it means everything to students who've been struggling with whether school is a safe place for them. I get an email from a trans student saying she finally feels safe at the school, that knowing the board officially supports her right to be herself makes her actually want to come to class instead of dreading it. My youngest son gets assigned a project about local government and asks if he can interview me about the school board for his report. I answer his questions about how policies get made, what the board does, why local government matters, and he records everything on his phone with surprising focus. When I read his final paper a week later, he's written about how he used to think caring about politics was embarrassing, but now he sees it's how you actually protect people and make things better. He includes a section about how his mom went from reading articles at breakfast to changing actual policies, and he wants to do something similar when he grows up, maybe run for office or work on campaigns. Suzanne shows up at a board meeting 2.5 months into my term with a group of about 15 supporters to protest our new policies. They fill the community seating area, and several of them speak during public comment, using their 3 minutes each to argue that we're pushing inappropriate content on children and ignoring the will of parents. It's tense and uncomfortable, especially when one of them directly calls me out by name and questions my fitness to serve. But I stay calm and respond by explaining that our job is to serve all students, not just the ones whose parents are loudest, and that means creating schools where every kid can learn and feel safe, regardless of their identity or family background. I noticed that some of Suzanne's supporters actually seem to listen, instead of just waiting to argue, and one woman in the back nods slightly when I talk about protecting vulnerable students. The meeting ends without any real resolution because protests don't change votes. But I drive home thinking about how democracy means constantly having these uncomfortable conversations with people who disagree and how that's exhausting, but also kind of the whole point. 6 months into my term, the district releases standardized test scores, and several areas show improvement compared to last year. It's way too early to say our new policies caused the changes, but the data definitely hurts Suzanne's whole argument that progressive education destroys student learning. Victoria calls me the morning the scores come out, and we spend an hour going through the numbers together, highlighting which ones matter most. She suggests we get the information to Elliot at the paper before Suzanne's people can spin it their way. I email Elliot with the data and some context about what it means, and he runs a front-page story the next day with the headline comparing our district's gains to neighboring districts that didn't change anything. Suzanne shows up at the next board meeting claiming the improvements have nothing to do with policy and everything to do with teachers working harder despite our interference, but parents in the audience aren't buying it anymore. My husband comes home from work one evening looking both excited and kind of shocked. His boss called him in that afternoon and offered him a promotion to senior manager with a significant raise. During the meeting, she apparently told him that over the past year she's watched him grow into someone who actually listens when women on his team speak up, and that skill made him the obvious choice for the position. He sits at the kitchen table telling me this and admits that learning to listen to me, really listen instead of just waiting to argue, changed how he interacts with everyone at work. He's not perfect, and sometimes still defaults to his old patterns of talking over people or dismissing ideas too quickly, but now he catches himself and corrects course instead of doubling down. The promotion means we're more financially stable than we've been in years, and he credits me for basically forcing him to become a better person, even though it sucked at the time. My boys are all doing well in the school now, actually well instead of just getting by. My oldest started dating someone new a few months ago, a girl from his AP history class who challenges him in debates and doesn't let him get away with lazy arguments. I've heard them discussing books and politics in the living room, and he actually listens to her perspective instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. My middle son volunteers every Saturday morning with a youth sports program, teaching little kids about teamwork and respect, and his coach told me the younger players really look up to him. My youngest joined the environmental club at the school, the same kind of group I used to read articles about at breakfast back when that would get me mocked. He came home last week excited about a recycling initiative they're planning and asked if our family could start composting. A year after that breakfast confrontation that started everything, we're sitting around the same table eating dinner that I actually seasoned properly. My husband scrolls through his phone between bites and suddenly says he just read something really concerning about climate change, and we should talk as a family about what we can do to help. My boys all agree without any trace of mockery, and my oldest even mentions something his girlfriend told him about carbon footprints. I smile into my coffee and think about how sometimes the best way to teach people is to show them exactly what they're asking for, then give them the chance to choose something better.